Hi there, and welcome to this week's edition of Mining the Comments, in which we'll look at a comment from Abigail, who's trying to help her friend escape the barrage of thoughts. Without further ado, actually, let's jump right in and look at the comment and how, see how Abigail can help her friend. So, 8 hours ago, Abigail wrote the following. I'm now recovered, but I'm trying to help a friend who has been doing ACT, where you are encouraged to notice your thoughts. She has tried this, but just feels overwhelmed with the barrage of thoughts she has and has been doing it for months and still feels the same. I would just watch TV or read a book, but she doesn't want to do anything. What advice would you give? Should you notice or let the thoughts run wild? So before we look further into this, I want to say the first two things that come to my mind is firstly, Abigail, so glad you are, no longer struggling with insomnia. That is amazing. And secondly, what is maybe even more amazing is you want to help your friend. Sounds like she's having, anxiety, racing thoughts. And Abigail, you're seeing that what helps with insomnia. It's the same thing that will help. It's the same understanding, same insight, same path that will lead to us leaving other inner struggles. So that is so nice, and I believe this is how change will happen in the world. It's gonna be like one person helping another person, that person helps another person, etc., etc. So this made me really glad. And what also made me really glad is actually the reply to Abigail's comment that we'll also look at before I share my thoughts here. And this is from Kristen Connolly, who said, I started going to therapy while I was struggling with insomnia and intrusive thoughts. I would 100% recommend to your friend if they're open to it. I had a very similar issue. I wanted to just distract myself with TV and books, but my thoughts would get so overwhelming that I was afraid to be alone with myself. After starting therapy and doing some internal work practice, I've come so far and understood my thoughts so much better. Intrusive thoughts are just that, random, intrusive, unhelpful. They aren't evil or out to hurt you. I hope and pray that your friend finds some relief and learns some tools to help manage her thoughts. There is hope for recovery. And I think this is so nice to see that, the thoughts are just they're not evil or there to hurt you. There's no, there's no malintent. And the word intrusive itself is, a little tricky because it that in itself can we can sort of label them as something unwanted, something negative. But they're just thoughts, and the intrusiveness, we will understand why, why that seems to really apply to them as we look at some things I wrote down. I hope they will make a lot of sense. So let's go through this. So what I thought when I was reading this is, the first thing was that Abigail's friend has been quote unquote doing ACT, and ACT is really like an invitation towards non-doing, observing, non-engaging, not reacting, letting things be. But so easy, non-doing can become doing, and that's so natural because, of course, where Abigail's friend is at is not pleasant. And when all of us humans, when we're in a place where we feel threatened, we feel like we're in some kind of danger, we're scared, we're frazzled, we want to escape, we want to get away from that. So many things can become this attempt of escaping. So doing ACT can turn something that is really non-doing into doing, if you will. And now, to understand this further, how I like to teach this is that thoughts are messages and our emotions are signals. So basically, our brain often wants to communicate with us. It wants to tell us something about what's happening in the world. It interprets things for us, and especially when our brain thinks that there is some type of danger, where there's some kind of threat, then it feels that it's really important to send us messages or signals. And again, a message is a thought. We can see the thought, which is like, what if I can't function tomorrow? Let's say that's kind of a worry thought, and the signal then becomes anxiety, right? That's the signal is there to get our attention, and the message is there to communicate with us. That's the message is what the brain is really trying to say. It's sort of like a cell phone or something like that. The message is like a text message, but the signal, like whether it's like a vibration or like a ringtone or something, that signal is there to get our attention. And the brain works in a similar way. Like an emotion is there to get our attention or to activate or something like that, but the thought behind it is kind of like the message of what it actually wants to communicate. Now, here's the thing: when we want to stop communication, when we want like, no, brain, I don't want this communication, then our brain, and in this scenario, like our brain has something it feels is very important for us to convey. It thinks that we're in danger again. Then of course it wants to communicate with us even more. It's like, oh, what? This is not being received. The communication is not being received. It has to be amplified. So again, when we try to stop communication, when we try to stop thoughts, stop emotions, then those are amplified. The messages and the signals are amplified. So with this in mind, I rewrote part of the comment from Abigail to see how it looked like in my brain, how I read the message when I saw it. It would be something like this. Because she has tried ACT to stop the thoughts, they have grown into an overwhelming barrage. But she has kept trying and nothing has changed. That's how I read it, And, before we go into answering the question from Abigail, which was, should she notice or let the thoughts run wild? One more comment: watching TV and reading books, they can become ways to actually receive the communication. It sounds odd because they sound like obvious distractions, but if we are feeling kind of like racing thoughts and we're feeling anxious and we're like, you know what, I'm just going to watch some TV. And the intent with that is like, that will make it a bit easier for me to have these thoughts. It will make it easier for me to feel these emotions. It's an act of self-kindness. Then the intent is not to stop them, but it actually becomes an intent. The intent becomes to be okay with them, receive them, and that can make it easier because, again, the brain sees that the communication is received. No need to, keep repeating it or amplifying it. In fact, it becomes like de-amplified. The brain's like, oh, communication is going through. No need to repeat it. This can be de-amplified. But the tricky thing is like the exact same behavior, for example, watching TV or reading books, if that is done with the intent of trying to stop communication, then it just becomes one of these efforts that actually lead to amplification. So I thought that was something that would be really nice to point out. Now, the question from Abigail was this one: should she notice thoughts or let the thoughts run wild? And when I first read it, is like they actually is not, to me, is not like one or the other. Both can be helpful. If we, have a lot of thoughts, a lot of messages, again, just, noticing them, maybe writing them down or just saying them out loud or, thinking about them, letting them happen, so to speak. Again, I kind of mixed them up as I was talking here. You see, like noticing them and letting them run wild to me is very much the same thing. They're both non-doing. They're both, in both the expressions, there's the absence of trying to stop them. So it can be really helpful. But anything that isn't trying to stop them in communication leads where we want to be. If we receive the communication in any way, our brain will see less and less need to repeat messages and signals, and that barrage will fade. So I hope this is helpful, Abigail, and of course, feel free to show your friend this episode, and I hope it'll be really, really helpful to her. With that said, as always, any comments, thoughts, put them in the comment section. If you're finding your way to where you want to be thanks to our content here, that is amazing. Please share it. It would be wonderful to hear things getting easier for anyone here in our community. On the flip side, if things are tricky, if you're not quite seeing your path forward, if you're feeling alone, isolated, people around you don't really understand what you're going through, then please head over to thesleepcoachschool.com. Check out our coaching options. And if you decide to join any of our programs, then we look forward to seeing you on the inside. With that said, I wish you a nice and peaceful weekend. And one more thing, I almost forgot. I will be out of town for a few days. So next week will be pretty limited. I don't know if there'll be any content that are all or just a little bit. But the week after that, we'll be back to our regular programming. So just a heads up, have a nice weekend. Look forward to seeing you real soon. Onwards and inwards. Bye-bye.